There are 7,641 islands in the Philippines. Most of them have no name, and the ground beneath them all is still moving. This is one of the most dangerous places on Earth to build a life. The country sits on a seam where two plates of the planet's crust grind against each other. 24 of its volcanoes are still awake. Around 20 storms cross its waters every year. And more than 100 million people live here anyway. That is the question this country refuses to answer. Not how beautiful it is, why anyone stays. There is an answer, and it isn't in the landscape. It's in a single decision, repeated 100 million times a day. To build a life exactly where the danger is. By the end of this film, that decision will explain everything, including the strangest part of all. The same forces trying to destroy these islands are the ones that made them worth living on. On a map, the Philippines looks less like a country than a scattering. More than 7,000 islands thrown across the Western Pacific. Only about 2,000 are inhabited. Many are too small to hold a single house. The country breaks into three worlds: Luzon in the north, one large island around the capital, the Visayas in the middle, a scatter of smaller ones, and Mindanao in the south. From end to end, the archipelago stretches more than 1,000 miles. Between its islands live over 150 languages, not dialects, but separate tongues. A person from one island can be a foreigner on the next. It is less a single nation than 1,000 small worlds that happen to share a flag, a faith, and a sea. For all that fragmentation, one thing binds it together: the sea. There are no long highways stitching these islands into one piece, only the ocean between them and the boats that cross it. The Philippines was never really unified by land. It was unified by water, by people willing to sail from one island to the next and call the whole scattered thing home. To live here has always meant to be, in some way, a person of the sea. Whether you fish it, cross it, fear it, or simply fall asleep to the sound of it every night of your life. And yet this scattering is one of the most crowded nations on Earth. More than 110 million people, one of the densest large populations anywhere. It sits inside the Ring of Fire, the belt of faults and volcanoes that circles the Pacific, where most of the world's earthquakes and eruptions happen. And wherever you stand, the sea is never far. By every reasonable measure, a place like this should be empty. Violent ground, drowning coasts, storms without end. The kind of country people flee, not fill. Instead, they stay by the tens of millions, packed onto islands that seem built to shake them off. How a place this dangerous became this loved is the question that runs under everything here. And the closer you look, the stranger the answer gets. It starts underground, with the fire. The Philippines sits on a fault. Two plates of the Earth's crust meet beneath it, one grinding under the other slowly for millions of years. Where they grind, the crust cracks. And where it cracks, molten rock finds a way up. That is why these islands exist at all. They were pushed out of the sea by the same violence that still shakes them. This country isn't built beside the danger, it's built out of it. It isn't only the volcanoes, the whole country shakes. Hundreds of earthquakes register here every year, most too small to notice, a few strong enough to crack roads and bring down buildings. The ground is never quite still. People grow up knowing the floor itself can move, and they build and live and sleep on it anyway. The clearest proof stands in the south of Luzon. Mayon, a volcano so symmetrical it looks drawn by hand, a near-perfect cone rising more than 8,000 feet. It's also the most active volcano in the country. Here, beautiful and lethal aren't opposites. They're the same mountain. Just over 2 centuries ago, Mayon erupted and buried the town at its foot in a single day. One thing survived: a church bell tower still standing alone in an open field. The rest of the town is under the ground. And yet the fields around Mayon are among the most fertile in the region. Around 1 million people live within reach of its slopes. Farmers plant right up to the base of the mountain that erased a town. They know exactly what it can do. They stay anyway. Mayon is only the most famous of them. Closer to the capital sits another, Taal, a small volcano on an island, in a lake, on a much larger island. Barely 1,000 feet tall and one of the deadliest volcanoes in the world. Millions live within sight of it. When it wakes, it can bury the towns around its shores in ash and darken the skies over Manila itself. And still, those shores stay crowded with homes, farms, and weekend resorts. The view, people decide, is worth it. Here, it usually is. To understand why, look at what the fire leaves behind. When a volcano erupts, it destroys. But volcanic ash breaks down over centuries into some of the most fertile soil on the planet. The thing that buries the farm is the thing that feeds it. Here, that isn't a metaphor. It's the reason anyone could settle at all. The fire gives more than soil. Drill down almost anywhere here, and the rock runs hot enough that the country taps it for power. The Philippines is one of the largest producers of geothermal energy on Earth. The same heat that feeds the volcanoes quietly turns turbines and lights the cities. The thing underground that can erase a town is also in part what keeps its lights on. Nowhere shows it more clearly than the mountains of northern Luzon. For centuries, the Ifugao people have farmed these slopes. Not on the land, but into it. They carved the mountains into steps, thousands of them, stacked from the valley floor up toward the clouds. Laid end to end, the terraces are said to reach much of the way around the world. They were cut largely by hand, no wheel, no iron machines. A people once dismissed as primitive, engineered, something modern engineering still struggles to match into the side of a mountain. And they're still watered the way they always have been. Rainforest above catches the rain and lets it down slowly through the steps, one level at a time. a machine with no moving parts, powered by nothing but water. It isn't only rice either. The same volcanic ground gives the country some of the most fertile farmland in Asia, hillsides of coconut and banana, sugar and pineapple, coffee grown in the cooler heights. The mountains that threaten to erase a town are the same ones that feed it season after season. Destruction and abundance pouring out of the very same rock. The danger shaped more than farmland. Even the churches here were built to survive it. When Spanish priests first raised them centuries ago, they built tall and delicate the way they had back home. The earthquakes brought them down, so they built again, lower, wider, walls thick as a fort, braced with massive stone buttresses. The bell towers set little apart so they couldn't crush the congregation if they fell. There's a name for the style that came out of it: earthquake baroque. Even faith here had to be built to survive the ground. The fire made the soil. The people made the rest. But fire is only half of this country. The other half is water. For all its volcanoes, the Philippines is defined by the sea. With 7,000 islands, no one lives far from a coast. The water is the road, the border, the market, and the horizon. And the sea does strange things to this land. On the island of Bohol, more than 1,000 hills rise from the ground, almost identical, almost perfectly round. In the dry season, their grass turns brown, and from the air, the island looks scattered with giant chocolate drops. Their limestone, an ancient seabed, lifted up and worn down over millions of years. This ground was underwater once. Further west lies Palawan, where cliffs of that same limestone drop straight into water so clear the boats seem to hang in the air. Beneath one of them, a river runs into the mountain. More than 5 miles of it in the dark, one of the longest underground rivers on Earth, before it spills back into the ocean. There's a reason this sea teems the way it does. The Philippines sits at the very heart of the Coral Triangle, the richest stretch of ocean on the planet. More kinds of coral and fish gather in these waters than anywhere else on Earth. One narrow passage between two islands is known to scientists simply as the center of the center, the single most biodiverse patch of sea in the world. 6 of the world's 7 species of sea turtle move through it, a third of every reef fish that exists. The same ocean that drowns whole coastlines is also the most alive water on Earth. In one southern bay, the largest fish in the sea, whale sharks, the length of a bus, drift in close to shore, and people swim out to meet them. And for the millions who live along the coast, that abundance is simply breakfast. Small wooden boats slip out before first light and come back with the day's catch. Fishing here is less an industry than a rhythm, the same one families have kept for 1,000 years, reading the tide and the reef, the way farmers elsewhere read the soil. Off one small island, sardines gather by the million. A single silver mass that folds and turns like a living cloud, close enough to shore that a swimmer can wade straight out and stand inside it. Abundance here isn't rare or hidden. It's everywhere, just under the surface, waiting a few strokes from the sand. The sea gives, and then once in a while, it asks for something back. It is why the postcards exist at all. The white sand, the impossible blue, the reef a few strokes from shore, but none of it, to the people here, is only scenery. It is the pantry, the highway, and sometimes the graveyard, all at once. Every island has its own patch of sea to work, its own reef, its own current, its own weather. A fisherman here doesn't know the ocean. He knows this stretch of it, the way you'd know a street. Between the big islands lie thousands of smaller ones. Some no more than a reef, a stand of palms, and a strip of white sand. For the people on them, the sea isn't scenery. It's the line between connected and alone. This is the calm face of the Philippines, the one on the postcards. But the water here has another face. For most of this film, the danger has come from below. But the thing people here fear most doesn't come from the ground at all. It comes from the sea and the sky above it. The Philippines is among the most storm-exposed countries in the world. More than 20 tropical storms enter its waters every year. Not once in a while. Every year. Most pass, people rebuild before the next one, and then every so often, one arrives that changes everything. Just over a decade ago, one of the strongest storms ever recorded to make landfall struck the Central Islands. Winds close to 200 miles an hour. A wall of seawater driven inland like a tide with no bottom. Whole coastal towns were gone in a morning, and thousands of people with them. And here's the part that's hard to explain from the outside. They rebuilt in the same place, facing the same sea. There's almost a rhythm to it. A season for storms, a season for repairs, the same houses raised again on the same posts. Over generations, the whole country has learned to live ready. When a storm forms far out in the Pacific, it is given a name, and the name travels ahead of it, on the radio, on every phone, in every village. Boats are hauled up the beach, roofs are lashed down. Families already know which building becomes the shelter and which road floods first. You can't stop the sea from coming, but you can be standing, and together when it does. Fire below, storms above, and 100 million people choosing every day to stay in between. To understand that choice, look at the people who never left the water at all. Some people here never chose between land and sea. They chose the sea. Across the southern islands, whole communities live above the water. Houses on stilts, villages joined by boats instead of roads. Where the rest of the country builds on ground that shakes, they built on the one thing that never pretends to be solid at all. Among them are the Bajau, who have lived on and around the water for centuries. Some families once spent almost their whole lives on boats, coming ashore, mainly to trade or to bury their dead. Generations of free diving changed them. Bajau divers hold their breath for minutes at a time, and studies have found their bodies adapted over generations to spend more of life beneath the surface. A village like this runs on water, the way another runs on roads. Boats are the cars. The market floats to the door. Nets dry in the gaps between houses, and the day is shaped by the tide instead of the clock. From the outside, it looks impossibly fragile, a whole life balanced on stilts above a moving sea. To the people who live it, the water underneath isn't a danger below the floor. It is the floor. For the children of these villages, the ocean isn't something to fear. They learn to swim before they can properly walk. The water under the house is a backyard, a playground, and a pantry all at once. There's the answer the whole country keeps circling. On land that keeps shaking, they stopped fighting the water and moved onto it. They let the thing that threatens this place become the thing that carries them. You don't beat a country like this. You learn its rhythm and live inside it. A house on stilts doesn't fight the tide. It rests on it, the way the whole country has learned to rest on what it can't control. And these islands have been teaching that lesson longer than almost anywhere on Earth. The people here descend from some of the greatest ocean voyagers in history. Thousands of years ago, their ancestors spread across the water on a scale nothing else in the ancient world came close to, reaching one horizon at a time from Madagascar to the far edge of the Pacific. They did it in outrigger canoes. No engines, no instruments. They read the stars, the swell, the flight of birds. To them, the open ocean wasn't a wall between islands. It was the road that connected them. That inheritance is buried in the language itself. The oldest boats here were called balangai, long wooden vessels that carried an entire extended family across open water. When those families finally came ashore and settled, the community they formed kept the name. To this day, the smallest unit of any Filipino town, the neighborhood you belong to, is called a barangay, a boat full of people who arrived together. The word for community here is, almost exactly, the word for the boat that brought you. It was one of the widest expansions of a single people the ancient world ever produced, and it was carried out almost entirely by sea. A people handed some of the most dangerous ground on the planet didn't retreat from it. They took the very thing that should have trapped them. Thousands of miles of open sea, and made it the thing that carried them furthest. The danger again became the gift. And here's the part the danger never quite explains. This is not a fearful country. On Siargao, the same Pacific that sends the typhoons also sends the waves. Surfers travel from the other side of the world for them. The storm season and the surf season are the same season. The threat and the reason people come are the same water. There's one place that breaks the pattern. Manila, one of the most densely populated cities on Earth, where the quiet of the islands gives way to traffic, noise, and light that never fully goes out. It looks like the opposite of everything else here. It isn't. It's the same instinct, concentrated. life crowding into whatever space it's allowed on ground it doesn't fully control. Nothing here is wasted, and nothing sits empty for long. Nothing captures that instinct better than the jeepney. When the war ended, the islands were left with thousands of abandoned military jeeps, so people cut them open, stretched them long, bolted on a roof and two facing rows of seats, and turned them into the buses that still crowd the streets today. Then they painted them, chrome, saints, family names, slogans, until everyone was a rolling artwork, no two the same. A machine built for war, remade into the most Filipino thing on the road. Take what's left, make it carry you, and make it beautiful while you're at it. The life doesn't only pile into Manila either. Cebu in the center, Davao in the south, dozens of smaller cities, each its own knot of noise and commerce, grown up on its own island, in its own dialect. This country doesn't have one center, it has 100. The islands and the city are answering the same question in two languages. Stay, adapt, fill the space you're given. And then, everywhere, do something that looks almost impossible from the outside. Celebrate it. For a country under this much danger, you'd expect a careful, quiet people. The Philippines is the opposite. It's one of the most festive nations on earth. Almost every town has a patron saint, and almost every saint has a fiesta. A day or a week when the whole community pours into the streets. There are so many that somewhere in the country, on almost any day of the year, one is happening. Marching bands, processions that fill entire roads, households cooking for anyone who walks through the door. The quiet measure of a good day is how many strangers you manage to feed. The celebration doesn't even wait for a reason. The Christmas season here is the longest in the world. It begins while the rest of the planet is still in autumn and runs for months until whole streets glow with the parole, a star-shaped lantern that turns neighborhoods into fields of light. And the most telling celebration of all was born straight out of disaster. In one southern city, after a season that brought both an economic collapse and a shipwreck that took many of its own, the people did something that shouldn't make sense. They threw a festival. They filled the streets with dancers in wide, smiling masks and called their home the City of Smiles. Not to deny the grief, to refuse to be ruled by it. There's even a word for what holds it together. Bayanihan. The old image behind it is a whole village lifting a neighbor's house onto their shoulders and carrying it to safer ground. On islands where the ground itself can't be trusted, what people lean on isn't the land. It's each other. When there's no fiesta, they make their own. Basketball hoops hang from every wall and alley, nailed up wherever there's room, in a country that barely has the flat land for a court. Karaoke spills out of open windows on ordinary nights. It's the same instinct running under everything else here, to fill whatever space you're given with as much life as it will hold. That's the pattern, one last time. This is not a country that meets danger with fear. It meets it with music, food, and a crowd. Go back out to the water, to the space between the islands where most of this country actually lives. And you can finally answer the question from the beginning. What does it mean to belong to a place that's always trying to take itself back? It means you stop trying to own the ground. Out here, the land isn't something you defend or inherit. It erupts, floods, and shifts. What endures isn't the ground at all. It's the sea that connects every island to every other one, that fed every generation before this one, and can't be buried, burned, or carried away. And it's the refusal, passed down for thousands of years, to leave. The danger was never the whole story. The fire that buries the town builds the soil that feeds the next one. The plates that crack the crust are the ones that lifted these islands from the ocean. The sea that floods the coast is the sea that fed everyone who ever lived here. There's no version of this place that is only beautiful. The beauty and the threat come from the same source. You take both, or you take neither. That is what it means to live in the Philippines. Not to own a piece of ground, but to belong to the sea around it, and to the people who chose, against every reason, to stay. At the very start of this film, the ground was still moving. Come back to that one last time. Somewhere on these islands this morning, someone is rebuilding. A house on stilts over the tide. A field replanted at the foot of a volcano. A boat pushed back out over water that took something last season and will be asked to give again this one. From the outside, that looks like stubbornness. For the person doing it, it's the opposite. It's proof that the island is still theirs, that the soil the fire made still feeds them, that on the most dangerous ground on earth, you can still build a home and rebuild it tomorrow if you have to. The ground here is still moving. It always will be. And more than 100 million people have decided that's a price worth paying. To live somewhere this alive. Next time, we leave the fire behind for cold water and a very different kind of danger. Half a century ago, one of the poorest countries in Europe found oil beneath its frozen northern sea. More than almost anyone expected. The kind of sudden fortune that has rotted nations before. Norway did the opposite. It refused to spend it, locking most of it away in the biggest savings fund on earth for people not yet born. Where the Philippines had to survive its nature, Norway had to survive its luck. That's where we go next. Subscribe to keep discovering how people live at the edges of the world. We'll see you at the next edge of the map.